The cathedral bells tolled with an authority that made even the stone floor tremble. Yet Lady Rosamund Ellery felt as insubstantial as mist beneath their weight. London society had gathered in glittering rows, their jewels glinting like watchful eyes, each guest perched in a posture of morbid fascination. They had not come to witness a love match, for none was expected. They had come for the spectacle of an heiress tethered to a man whose fortune outshone his reputation. Rosamund stood at the altar, her gown heavy with embroidery chosen by a mother who had mistaken finery for protection, while her heart thrashed against its confines like a bird beating its wings against iron bars. She dared a glance at the man waiting to claim her. Mr. Silas Blackwell, an industrial magnate whose wealth had risen with the smoke of his factories, watched her with thinly veiled impatience. His smile was small, sharp, and utterly humorless. He did not bother with tenderness. He had no need for it. A woman, he had once said within Rosamund's hearing, was an acquisition like any other, useful if silent, troublesome if not. Her father, cornered by dwindling investments, had agreed to the match with a relieved sigh, and her mother had spoken of duty while fastening Rosamund's veil with trembling hands. Now, as the priest opened his book, Silas leaned toward her under the guise of adjusting his gloves. "Do not faint," he murmured, each word dipped in disdain. "Marriage demands sturdier nerves than yours." The whisper landed like a strike. Rosamund's fingers tightened around her bouquet, its white roses trembling with her breath. She was not weak, though she had been treated as though fragility were her only quality. She was not meek, though silence had long been expected of her. The cathedral lights blurred as realization pressed against her ribs. If she spoke her vows here, if she submitted to the role carved for her, she would vanish beneath a man who cared nothing for her mind, her voice, or the quiet rebellions of her heart. A rustle swept through the pews. Anticipation, gossip poised on its starting block. The priest lifted his gaze to invite her answer. The moment stretched thin, a string drawn dangerously taut. Rosamund heard her mother's breath hitch behind her, felt Silas's impatience sharpening like a blade, and understood that the life before her was not survival, but surrender. Something within her, some hidden, long-neglected instinct, rose with startling swiftness. Her bouquet slipped from her hands and struck the stone floor with a soft, accusing thud. Before confusion could solidify into protest, Rosamund turned, gathered her skirt, and fled down the aisle. Gasps erupted like gunfire. A lady cried out her name. Silas thundered a command she refused to hear. She burst through the cathedral doors and into the harsh daylight, her pulse roaring louder than the city beyond. A waiting carriage, meant to bear her to the reception, became an unexpected ally. She climbed in, ordered the startled coachman to ride, and felt the wheels jolt into motion. But carriages were too easily followed, too easily intercepted. After several streets, she descended, paid the bewildered man her father's emergency coin purse, and mounted a rented horse tethered near a post. She rode without direction, guided only by the desperate instinct to outrun shame, captivity, and a future that had been fitted onto her like shackles disguised as lace. London's din faded behind her. Fields rose to meet the horizon, their winter greens washed in pale sun. Her veil tore free and fluttered into the road, forgotten. She rode until her legs burned and her breath scraped her lungs raw. The world narrowed to hoofbeats, heartbeat, and the steady unraveling of everything she had been expected to become. Hours passed, though she could not count them. Her gown, once pristine, was marked with mud and the scars of brambles. She no longer felt like a bride. She felt like a fugitive seeking a self she had been denied. By twilight, exhaustion pressed down with merciless hands. Her vision wavered. Trees blurred into shadowed pillars guarding a long, winding road that led to a manor barely visible through the gathering dusk. She recognized nothing, yet the estate possessed a solemn dignity, as though it stood apart from the noisy world she had fled. She urged her fading strength into one final effort and steered the horse toward the gate. The manor's lanterns glowed like distant constellations. As she approached the steps, her limbs ceased obeying her. She slid from the saddle, clutching the rail to remain upright. Servants appeared, startled by the apparition of a mud-streaked bride collapsing upon their threshold. Their voices blurred, but hands steadied her. The door opened wider, and a figure stepped into the glow. Broad-shouldered, impeccably dressed despite the late hour, and marked by an expression at once curious and cautious, he regarded her with a calm that contrasted the chaos of her flight. She sensed authority in his bearing, solitude in his eyes that missed nothing. Someone whispered his name with reverence and concern. The Duke of Ashcombe. Rosamund tried to speak, but her strength gave way at last. As darkness swept over her, her final impression was of the Duke's silhouette descending the steps with purpose, as though her arrival had been long anticipated by fate itself. Rosamund awoke to the muted hush of a room that seemed designed for solitude rather than display. High windows admitted a pale morning light, softened by gauze curtains that swayed when a winter breeze slipped through imperfect frames. The chamber held none of the ostentation of her family's townhouse. Instead, it bore an air of quiet dignity. Polished wood, a modest hearth, a single vase of dried lavender whose fragrance lingered in the air like a memory. Her first instinct was disorientation, but it quickly gave way to alarm as the events of the previous night surged back with bruising clarity. She sat upright, wincing at the heaviness in her limbs, and found her once grand gown folded neatly at the foot of the bed, its ruined fabric a testament to her rebellion. Before panic could take hold, a soft knock preceded the entrance of a maid carrying a tray. The young woman offered a polite curtsy, her expression tempered with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "His Grace requests that you take broth before he speaks with you," she said, placing the tray on a small table. The words carried no judgment, but Rosamund felt exposed all the same. A duke! She had collapsed at the home of a duke. Even in her desperation, she had not imagined such an outcome. When the maid withdrew, Rosamund forced herself to rise. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. Tangled hair, smudged cheeks, eyes too large with worry. Yet beneath the disarray, she detected something unexpected, a faint, defiant ember of freedom. She did not know whether it could survive the scrutiny of the man who ruled this estate, but its presence steadied her breath. A second knock sounded, firmer this time. Rosamund braced herself as the door opened to reveal the Duke of Ashcombe. He stood as if carved from the estate's very stone, tall, composed, with a face marked by the quiet severity of a man accustomed to bearing responsibilities alone. His dark hair framed features that might have seemed austere if not for the intelligence in his gaze, which roamed her face with neither impropriety nor indifference. "You are awake," he said, his voice low, his diction measured with the precision of someone who rarely wasted words. "I must thank you, Your Grace," she replied, dipping in a restrained curtsy. "My arrival was most unplanned, so I gathered." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him with deliberate gentleness. "My staff reported that you arrived in a state of considerable distress. May I inquire whether you are in danger?" Rosamund hesitated. Truth had become perilous currency, yet deception felt equally unsustainable under his discerning gaze. "I fled my wedding," she said quietly. "I would not, bind myself to a man whose cruelty my parents dismissed as temperament. I have disgraced them and myself, and I fear the world will interpret my flight as madness or immorality." The Duke's expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, from inquiry to contemplation. "Your courage is not disgrace," he said, "but society seldom distinguishes between the two." She searched his face, startled by his unexpected sympathy. The newspapers, she knew, often portrayed him as a recluse whose brother's scandalous death had cast a pall over his household. Yet the man before her radiated a restraint that suggested not coldness but caution, a heart disciplined rather than hardened. He took a seat across from her, the chair creaking slightly beneath his weight. "London is already stirring with speculation," he continued. Your groom has sent riders in several directions. It will not be long before someone arrives at my gates, demanding explanations. I shall leave at once, Rosamund said, rising instinctively. I have no wish to entangle you in my folly. Sit, he instructed, the single syllable firm but not unkind. She obeyed, more from the unexpected reassurance in his tone than from habit. If you depart now, you will be found before nightfall. And if Mr. Blackwell's nature aligns with what you suggest, I have no intention of returning you to him. She stared at him, unable to mask her astonishment. You would protect me? Without knowing me? I know enough, he replied. A woman who gallops through the night to escape a wedding seldom does so for trivial reasons. The simplicity of the statement pierced her like an arrow. For the first time since her flight, she felt the trembling loosening within her chest. A footman appeared at the doorway, bowing swiftly. Your Grace, messengers from London have arrived. They claim urgent business. The Duke nodded, then turned back to Rosamund. The world is assembling its accusations. I will meet them and determine which threats hold substance. Until then, you are safe here. But they will suspect impropriety, she whispered. Your reputation has survived far worse, he said, cutting her gently short. Allow them to talk. Words have sharp edges, but they cannot wound a man who has already bled. His gaze softened, though only for a heartbeat. Rest. You will need strength for what lies ahead. He departed with a sweep of his coat, leaving Rosamund breathless in the silence he left behind. Safety, it seemed, had arrived in the shape of a man who owed her nothing, yet offered her shelter with the gravity of a vow. And though uncertainty gathered like fog at the windows, she sensed the first fragile thread of hope weaving itself through the ruins of her former life, drawing her inexorably deeper into a story she had not meant to begin. Rosamund found the library of Ashcombe Manor by accident, drawn by the soft glow beneath its heavy oak door. She had risen from her room, intending only to walk the corridors and gather her thoughts. But the subdued light and faint scent of old paper felt like an invitation. Inside, shelves towered to the ceiling, filled with worn spines that hinted at a lifetime of careful study. A fire crackled with gentle insistence, casting amber warmth across the carpet. She stepped closer, her fingers brushing the back of a leather-bound atlas, when a voice, low, steady, unmistakably controlled, drifted from the shadows. I was beginning to wonder when you might seek refuge here. The Duke of Ashcombe emerged from an alcove, a volume in hand. His presence filled the room with quiet authority, though nothing in his posture suggested reproach. Rosamund felt a flutter of unease, not from fear but from the peculiar awareness that this man, unlike any she had known, saw the truth of her even in silence. I did not intend to intrude, she said, stepping back. Then consider this intrusion welcomed, he replied, placing the book on a nearby table. The library has long suffered from too little company. His attempt at levity was subtle, but it untied a knot of tension within her. She moved toward the fire, holding her hands out to the warmth. Your Grace, earlier you spoke of threats and accusations. Have there been developments? He joined her at the hearth, though he maintained the respectful distance he always seemed to observe. There have been messages, he said. Mr. Blackwell asserts that you were coerced into flight. He claims you are unwell, too fragile to decide your own future. It is a convenient narrative for him. Convenient, she echoed bitterly, but false. I know. His tone carried a quiet conviction. But truth rarely wins without a champion. Rosamund turned to face him. The fire lit one side of his face in warm relief, the other retreating into shadow, giving him the appearance of a man straddling two worlds, public and private, past and present. Why would you champion me, Your Grace? My troubles are not yours. Because I recognize the sort of cage he would build around you, he answered softly. And because I have known what it is to be trapped by circumstance, spoken of unfairly, judged without recourse. A silence stretched between them, rich with things neither dared articulate. She studied him with new curiosity, sensing sorrow beneath his composure. The rumors about his brother, dark hints of scandal and betrayal, hovered at the edge of memory, but she dared not voice them. Instead, she asked, "Is that why you withdrew from society?" His jaw tightened by a fraction. "Partly, but solitude is easier to bear than the noise of those who pretend to understand one's grief." Her breath caught, for grief recognized grief. "I am sorry," she murmured. He inclined his head in acknowledgement, though his eyes softened with a gratitude too restrained to be spoken. To distract them both, he reached for a small poker and adjusted the fire. "You may find this room agreeable," he said. "Use it as you wish. Books, unlike people, remain loyal to those who handle them gently." His attempt at a smile was fleeting yet genuine. Rosamund felt warmth unfurl in her chest, delicate as new petals. "Thank you," she said. "I feared I had forfeited any claim to gentleness." "Never." The single word carried such unexpected firmness that she nearly stepped back from its force. "You may have been denied compassion, Lady Rosamund, but you have not lost the right to receive it." Before she could reply, footsteps echoed in the hall. A servant appeared at the threshold, bearing a letter sealed in heavy black wax. The Duke accepted it with a brief nod, dismissing the man with a gesture. Rosamund watched as he broke the seal, his eyes scanning the contents. The shift in his expression, controlled yet unmistakably tense, sent dread curdling through her. "Is it him?" she asked. "Yes," the Duke replied, folding the letter with slow deliberation. "Mr. Blackwell threatens to bring legal action against any who harbor you. He speaks of breach of contract, defamation, and damages to his livelihood." Her breath faltered. "He seeks to punish you for offering me safety. He seeks to reclaim what he believes he owns." Alistair met her gaze with calm intensity. "But you are not a commodity, and I will not return you to his keeping." Emotion constricted her throat. "You risk much, Your Grace. More than I ever intended." He stepped closer, still respectable in distance, yet more present than he had allowed himself to be before. "If my actions carry cost, I accept it knowingly. You need not bear guilt for the choices I make freely." His steady gaze held hers until she felt her composure fray. She turned away, blinking rapidly, ashamed of the tears gathering despite her resolve. "Forgive me," she whispered. "I have been strong for so long that I hardly know how to unravel." "Then unravel," he said gently. "Ashcombe Manor is built of stone thick enough to hold your sorrow. You are safe to be as you are." Those words broke something open. She pressed a hand to her mouth, willing herself not to weep in earnest. The Duke said nothing further. Instead, he moved to stoke the fire, giving her dignity through silence. When she regained control, he looked back at her, offering a small but unmistakable reassurance. "Tomorrow, Lady Rosamund, we will determine the shape of your future. Tonight, allow yourself rest." She nodded, though sleep felt impossibly distant. Yet as she left the library, she carried with her a fragile, startling truth. The Duke's protection was not duty alone. Something within him, wounded, resolute, quietly honorable, had begun to intertwine with her own desperate hope, binding their fates more tightly than either had anticipated. Dawn arrived shrouded in a muted haze, as though the world itself hesitated to witness what the day might demand. The Duke had departed before sunrise, leaving Rosamund with only a brief message written in his steady hand. "Trust that I shall return with the truth secured." The simplicity of those words did little to quiet the thrum of apprehension beneath her ribs. She moved through Ashcombe Manor with restless steps, her thoughts circling the same anxious loop. What if Blackwell's influence proved too extensive, or worse, if the Duke underestimated the depth of the man's malice? Rosamund tried to banish such fears, yet they clung to her like stubborn shadows. Hours crept forward with excruciating delicacy. She settled briefly in the solar, attempting to stitch a torn hem of her gown, but her fingers trembled too much for precision. She wandered the gardens, where frost still lingered on the grass, glimmering like tiny shards of glass. In her aimless pacing, she realized how deeply the Duke's presence had intertwined with her sense of stability. His voice, calm even in conflict, his gaze, discerning yet never intrusive, his readiness to defend her without demand for recompense. These had woven themselves into the fabric of her fragile hope. Now, as silence swallowed the estate, she felt that hope strain under its own weight. When the distant clatter of hooves finally broke the stillness, she spun toward the manor gates with a gasp. The Duke rode through the archway, posture taut but composed, his coat bearing the creases of long hours spent on the road. She hurried forward instinctively, stopping only when propriety reminded her she should not greet him as though he were someone she longed for. Yet the moment he dismounted and their eyes met, she sensed that something profound had shifted between them. "Lady Rosamund," he greeted, removing his gloves. "You have been waiting." "I could do nothing else," she admitted. "Are you unharmed?" "A negotiation rarely wounds the flesh," he replied with wry restraint, "though it may bruise one's patience." She searched his face, desperate for an answer. Did he relent? A faint smile, tired yet triumphant, softened his features. He yielded. "I secured your freedom, fully, formally, and without condition." Relief struck her with such force that her knees weakened. She steadied herself against a stone pillar, breath trembling. "How did you manage it?" "Blackwell is not a man accustomed to surrender. He is a man accustomed to power," the Duke corrected, "and thus vulnerable to the one force he cannot control, exposure." I presented evidence of his conduct toward his employees and the quiet testimonies of those he sought to silence. He realized that to pursue you publicly would invite scrutiny he could not withstand. Rosamund covered her mouth, overwhelmed not by the strategy, but by the extraordinary effort he had undertaken on her behalf. "You risked much, more than anyone has ever risked for me." He held her gaze, and for a moment, propriety seemed a fragile barrier between them. "I did only what honor required," he said. "You deserve the right to choose the course of your own life." "And what course is that now?" she whispered. "That," he replied gently, "is for you alone to decide." The words were liberating, yet they left her unexpectedly bereft. For days she had lived beneath the shelter of his roof, buoyed by his steadiness, drawn to the quiet conviction that steadied his every action. She could not imagine leaving Ashcombe without feeling as though she were tearing herself from something essential. Before she could speak further, the manor steward approached with cautious urgency. "Your Grace, a messenger from London awaits. He claims his business concerns today's parliamentary session." The Duke exhaled, the weight of duty settling over him like a familiar cloak. "Rosamund, excuse me. I shall not be long." But as he turned away, she found her voice. "Your Grace, Alistair." The use of his given name startled even her. He paused, and she stepped closer, compelled by a truth she could no longer swallow. "You say my future is mine to decide. Yet I must ask, does yours hold room for company?" His stillness was eloquent. Slowly, he faced her fully, and something in his expression softened with unmistakable vulnerability. "I believe my life destined for solitude," he said. "But these past days have shown me what it feels like to be needed, not for title or protection, but simply for being who I am." Her breath caught. "You are needed," she said. "By me." His eyes warmed with a depth she had never seen in him. "Then allow me to speak plainly." He stepped nearer, his voice dropping to a measured intensity. "I do not ask for gratitude, Rosamund. What I offer is choice, your choice. If you would remain at Ashcombe, not as a fugitive but as its future mistress, then know that I extend that invitation with a heart no longer content to be silent." Emotion surged through her with disarming clarity. "Alistair," she murmured, "I would not remain out of indebtedness." "And I would not ask it if I sought anything less than all you are," he replied. Before more could be said, the steward cleared his throat, an apologetic reminder of obligations that could not be delayed. The Duke inclined his head toward her, a promise lingering in his gaze. "We will finish this conversation," he said softly. She watched him depart, heart unmoored yet alight. Though the day had delivered her freedom in the eyes of society, a far more perilous freedom now blossomed, one of the heart, one that demanded courage every bit as bold as her flight from the cathedral. And as the Duke disappeared into the manor, Rosamund understood with startling certainty that her story with him had only begun its true ascent.